Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I'm happy to be here at Republica. It's a quite different audience, a more mixed audience as I'm used to, more in the scientific area. But I try to provide you with some thoughts and ideas and concepts about the future of our cities. And as you see already from the title, I'm talking about beyond smart cities because I think that this consideration of smartness is not a goal in itself, but it should be a humane city, a sociable city, and a cooperative city, which is cooperative towards the citizens. And so this is the approach. So I will briefly explain some of the concepts based in that we are living in an urban age. I will then come up with the goals and objectives for a humane, sociable, and cooperative smart hybrid city. And then I will have a critical view because, as you see, redefining the smart everything paradigm, which is prominent and dominant all over, as we already heard also in the previous session about autonomous driving. Mercedes-Benz is saying, yeah, we can do everything and so forth. And another important aspect of my talk is privacy. And I think that we should have privacy by design as a first-class objective, so that we're not doing some privacy consideration after we have designed these kind of technology systems. And then I will talk about some conclusions. So the issues and challenges we are faced with in the urban age, that they have been and will increasingly become the central hubs in the 21st century. And this results from a number of aspects, like influx from people coming from the rural areas, have a dream of a better life, etc. And the result is that we have different kinds of so-called megacities. On the one hand, say you have a very technology-driven, high-comfort environment like Tokyo, or on the other hand, you have things like Mumbai, where you have all the problems of these large cities. So we are talking about urban life management from a citizen's perspective, but also from an administration perspective. So I will warn you that these smart cities are not a solution for the problems of megacities and the urban age, but they might contribute some aspects of it that is important. It's one perspective. So when you talk about the city of the future and you Google, you will find these bright scenarios or dark scenarios. So the question is this our future we will want to live in? You see the flying cars, which were mentioned also in the session before. But sometimes it's useful to go back into the past to see, like this is in the 1920s, how people were thinking about how things could be in the future. And I especially like this guy floating around on the sofa with a cigar and a glass of champagne between the skyscrapers. Also in terms of transportation, you have all kinds of ideas already in the past which have not come true. So I think there's a certain skepticism also for other provocative ideas about the future. Then what is the present? You have different types of cities. Like this is a not so familiar view of Venice. You have like residential houses in Copenhagen, these kind of configurations, or you have floating villages in the Philippines, or you have Palm Jumeirah, Palm Jumeirah Island in Dubai, or for example, this hotel, the Sky Park in Singapore, 200-meter high, and an infinity pool, and I had the pleasure to swim there in this infinity pool into the skyline of Singapore. Anyway, so what we're talking about are different notions and concepts. So there was a digital virtual city. Maybe some people of you who are a little bit older remember Second Life, something like this, or ubiquitous cities, like especially the technology-driven developments in Korea, or also smartness with respect to ecological environment aspects, or the standard definition of smart city deployment of ICT. I propose another term which is very true to my heart, which is hybrid city, because we have a real city and a virtual city. And so we have to look at the connection, balance, and interactions of this, the hybrid city, and then you can employ these kind of smart environments on top of it. So smartness of a city can also be defined as how much the city knows about itself and how this can be used by administrative people but also by the citizens, and how you can communicate this knowledge. So the whole discussion about open data, for example, is a good example here. The providing awareness and experience, for example, in transient spaces and public spaces. And I would like to give you an example. For example, here in Luzern, in Switzerland, they have what they call a velobarometer. And so the idea is that they are tracking the number of bicycles passing by, and you get then also some statistics, how many bicycles were going down this lane, and this kind also gives you information, not only for the planning, for the urban administration, but also for the people. Maybe they might be triggered to ride more the bicycle in the city. Another interesting example about self-awareness of a city is work by a former student of mine who is now a professor at the University of Tokyo, Shinichi Konomi, and he had the idea, how can we measure the congestion in the Tokyo subway? And of course, as you can imagine, it would be very difficult to trigger, to count all the people. These lights are kind of a little bit disturbing. I don't see you, only the first two rows here. Anyway, so the idea is it's difficult to trigger the people in, to count the people in the train. But so he had the idea, the more people, the more CO2 is being accumulated. And so he had CO2 sensors in the train. And so he was measuring the amount of CO2 in the train compartment. And then, of course, he had to do a mapping. So at some points, he had to count the people, and then he had a mapping, and he could infer, with people just wearing the CO2 measuring device, the congestion in the trains. Another aspect is, for example, in Africa, in Abidjan, they combined the bus routes with the mobile phone data, and they found out that the people, after they had left the bus, they had to walk quite a while to get to their final destination. And so what they were doing, comparing the bus routes and the mobile phone data, they could define new routes for the buses and also different kind of services to provide there. Another good example of smartness of a city could be to have what's called solar roadways. So it's a combination of smartness and energy. So what they have, these Yuli and Scott Brucey, they had a crowdfunding campaign. And so what they did, the idea is that you cover all the streets and freeways, etc., with the solar panels. And that would solve the whole energy problem of the world, basically, if you cover all of these surfaces. But in addition, you have sensors and all kind of additional information and parameters, and you can also kind of project, or with underneath LEDs, you can have dynamic information on the streets to warn for something, or to have different lanes, that all the 3 lanes going in one direction or one lane go dynamically. So these are some examples what could be done in a smart city. But the problem is, what are the goals? What are the long-term objectives of these kind of developments? And so already some time ago, I said that we envisioned for the urban age humane cities reconciling humans and technology. And I think this is the point. Technology is not a value in itself, but only if it's reconciling humans and technology. So the idea is having the smart city and then a cooperative city, that is, it's cooperative towards the users. So it helps them to get around, to provide services, etc. And this is what I call a humane and sociable city, reconciling humans and technology. And the idea is that the cooperative city can also be considered city as a service. So there are a number of special points. I don't have the time to go into detail for these, but I would like to address some of them, especially establishing a calm technology, which is in the background, providing ambient intelligence, and I will later make a distinction between ambient intelligence and artificial intelligence. What's also important is to keep the human in the loop in order to respect the individual and social life, so that it's not a complete automated system, also as you have it with autonomous driving. Respecting the rights of citizens, especially in terms of privacy, viewing the city and its citizens as mutual cooperation partners, etc. But also to motivate citizens to get involved in being part of the urban community. So the issue is, what kind of smart world do we want to live in? So the planned abundance of automating everything and seeking solutions in AI, artificial intelligence environments, only operated by algorithms, should be a warning sign, especially to the wide range of feasibility problems we are expecting. So the idea is first to identify the problems and then redefine the smart everything, smart everywhere, every time paradigm. And also to develop alternatives summarized in the proposal, keep the human in the loop. So what are the problems? So the smart everything paradigm can be briefly considered as a combination of IoT, Internet of Things, or as Cisco says, Internet of Everything, and artificial intelligence at a ubiquitous scale. We have smart devices and algorithms controlling processes, services, etc. You know this. And the humans are more and more removed and not anymore in control. So the first problem set is inappropriate, insufficient, and wrong behavior of these everything paradigm algorithms. The capabilities of AI are hugely overstated, and this is, of course, due to a lot of venture capital, which is currently invested in all these kind of activities. You have to look, the history of AI started in 1956 with a famous Dartmouth conference, where the term AI more or less was also defined. And so some prominent people at that time said, 10 years later, our AI will beat the world chess champions. This would have been 1967. But what was the first, when the IBM computer Deep Blue were beating Garry Kasparov? This was in 1997. So it was 30 years after the prediction and 40 years after the start of AI. And it took another 20 years that the AI program AlphaGo from Alphabet, that's Google, were beating the Korean Go master, right? So I think these are the dimensions we have to think in. Also, natural language processing. There was a time when in the US, the government said, we don't believe in it anymore, and they stopped funding natural language processing research for 20 years, between 1960 and 1980, for example. Yeah. Then autonomous driving is far from being realized. You probably heard about the deadly accident with a Tesla autopilot. This was a confusion of the sensors that they considered a passing truck with a sign which was believed to be over the roadway, right? So I think there are a lot of problems. Very simple pattern recognition, like identifying the speed limit signs, are not possible at this moment at a sufficiently reliable way. For example, they don't recognize at the moment the car I have with the speed limit information from a premium manufacturer in Germany is not recognizing this sign here underneath. And so you have all these legal implications also, because if the car says, Mr. Streitz, you're only allowed to go 30, although I'm driving at lunchtime and I'm allowed to drive at 50, so there's a discrepancy of 20 kilometers, the system states. And so what happens if they send this to the car insurance company, to the police, etc.? Right? Currently, nothing is happening, but it won't be long that these data will be exchanged at different platforms. So human driver can mentally correct wrong information, but the AI, the algorithms are being in a bad position here. Then there's a new aspect also in terms of hacking traffic signs. This might sound a little bit strange, but it's something what's called scam stickers, where you have small modifications of the traffic sign which are not visible to the human eye, but they are visible to the cameras and the sensors of the so-called smart cars, intelligent cars. And then they see something completely different in their algorithm results. And so sometimes it doesn't even matter that the AI is malfunctioning or it's hacked by these scam stickers, for example. The problem set B is assuming that the AI solutions are working correctly. There is a big issue with missing transparency. We really don't know what is the basis of these algorithms, because they are neither transparent nor comprehensible, and they are showing untraceable AI behavior, and because they are usually not reproducible results, because every time these algorithms, they are learning, etc., but they are then providing different kind of solutions. The best example currently is high-frequency trading. It cannot be retraced or tracked, reenacted, that they can actually follow what were the decisions by the algorithms to buy this kind of stock or this kind of stock and so forth. On the other hand, you have still existing rigidity. I think everybody who has tried to call a call center and there was not a human operator knows what I'm talking about. You can say, sometimes of course you have to say a certain keyword and then it might be understood, but then if you deviate a little bit from the predefined path, the system is lost and you don't get to what you want. Sometimes, of course, we still have this number or button we can press to say we want to be connected to a human operator. But in the future, there won't be this choice anymore, right? And so I'm very much skeptical here. Customers are losing control. They are deprived from getting appropriate individual services because their interventions are not attended to or not accepted. So you see, we're getting in very dangerous and stormy waters. So what I'm saying is that smartness or AI should not be a first-class citizen like an object-oriented design, first-class objects. And one could question, and we have to do it now, this complete automation in being subject to or victim of these kind of algorithmic approaches. So there's inappropriate behavior, but there's also privacy issues, not authorized, unobtrusive collection of personal data without consent, and making provisions of data obligatory, although even not task-related. You all know this, that when you install an app, the app wants to have the right to access this and this and this and this, although they don't actually need it for functioning. Like the best example is the flashlight on your smartphone. This flashlight app wants to access all kind of contact data, etc. And what does a flashlight need these data for operating as a flashlight, right? So I think one has to be really careful and look at what kind of permissions you're providing to these kind of services. I know a lot of people are providing a lot of data themselves up, but then they are still in control of it, right? So when people post things on Facebook, etc., then of course it's their own decision to make this. So the argument which often comes, yeah, the people are giving their data voluntarily to all these kind of providers, but they are still, okay, it's another question if this is a good or wrong decision, but they are still in control. What I'm arguing for is that the humans, the people, the citizens, should be in control and to decide if they want to share their data or not. So I distinguish between what I call system-oriented importunate smartness. This is complete automation, versus what I call people-citizen-oriented empowering smartness. That is, the human is still in the loop and can take and make more informed and mature actions based on additional information. So it's not that I'm saying these sensors should not be there. There should be sensors, but I should be in control, and I should then make the decision based on this additional information. And therefore, my claim is smart spaces make people smarter, right? So there shouldn't be a fear to have these kind of smart environments if they are used in the way I'm proposing, that is, the human is in the loop, is in control of these. But of course, there is no free lunch. How much feedback do you want? How much feedback can we process? So whenever you have these kind of dichotomies, you have to have a combination, because you don't want to involve at a very low level of these sensor aggregation. So at some point you will work on some set of aggregated data, but still you're in control. So there's a tricky trade-off between smartness and privacy, because the system can provide more services to you and smarter services, the more information, the more data it has about you. Okay? And so we have to see what is the trade-off, how much data I'm willing to provide in order to get a certain set of services, of smart services. And of course, people are providing a lot of data already now, like payback cards, loyalty cards, or monitoring their sport activities with their fitness bands. And because most of these apps, they don't keep the fitness health data on your device, they are going to a server and nobody knows what's happening with this. So what we have to do is a people, citizen-centered design approach, keeping the human in the loop. It has to be very interdisciplinary. The technical components, the social sciences, and design and architecture, etc. So privacy is a legal and moral right. It used to be. One has to say it's a socially negotiated feature often. It's becoming a commodity you pay for and trade, and therefore privacy becomes a privilege. So I found this very nice cartoon. There are two pigs talking about the free model. Isn't it great to have everything paid for in the barn? Yeah, and even the food is free. And Facebook, or you name it, and if you're not paying for it, you are not the customer. You're the product being sold. And I also argue, because we had a discussion yesterday in one of the sessions called Datenschatz versus Datenschutz, where the person from industry representative was always saying, yeah, but the services, they have to be free, and this can only be done with advertisement, and people have to be tracked and traced to get individual advertisement, etc. And I said then in the discussion section, I said, if the content is really good, the people are also willing to pay for it. So you should offer this as an option, because I think this free model of the internet comes from a time when I was devising and working on the internet and the web, etc., even before the web. But I think now it has become a commercial enterprise, and I think the attitude also of the customers has to change. So there are a number of privacy issues in the smart city, because there's already privacy issues in the virtual world, but it will become even more prominent and dominant in the real world, because in the virtual world you can still work with fake identities or anonymous or so. But when in the real world and there's a camera taking your picture, then they know you have been at this location, right? And so all the objects will be tagged. You're driving with your car or your bicycle, etc. You can't avoid it. So a good example is there's already surveillance by visible CCTV cameras, but these intelligent autonomous driving cars with a huge number of sensors and cameras, etc., when they are parked in the street, nobody knows what's happening to the sensors and the cameras. When the engine turns off, it doesn't mean that the sensors and the cameras are turned off too. Who's collecting the data? They are looking at the passengers, the pedestrians walking by, looking into houses and the windows, etc. Or the smart street lamps, which are supposed to be identifying smart parking capabilities in order to see where's the spot free. The smart street lights are also monitoring the streets, etc. So the principal problem is when you have a CCT camera, you're seeing this and you're often warned here, this is a video-controlled environment. But often in these other cases, you're not aware of it. You have no idea that the car in the street at the curbside is monitoring your behavior. So privacy by design has to be done as a competitive advantage also. I'm often talking also to people from the industry and manufacturers, and they say, oh, we have this disadvantage in the industry because the US companies, they have much more freedom with it to work with the data, etc. And I say, well, you just have to turn it around to say privacy by design as a competitive advantage, as a USP for European or German companies. There are a number of regulations, it was also talked about yesterday. And so I'm saying that we need not artificial intelligence, but ambient intelligence, which is a human-centered, social and cooperative ambient intelligence, instead of a technology-driven automating artificial intelligence, because we would like to reconcile humans and technology. And so there are 6 claims for the future, and I'm coming to the end. Okay. So the more the computer disappears and becomes invisible, the more it will determine our lives. It's all there in the environment, the world around us, the city is the interface, and there's a need, as I pointed out, to redefine the smart everything paradigm. We have to have a people-oriented design, people-empowering smartness with keeping the human in the loop. Smart spaces make people smarter, and privacy will become a commodity and thus a privilege unless we do something about it against this development. And this is my final slide. Thank you very much.
Okay.